Have you ever woken up on a Monday morning and had that horrible feeling that you just don't want to go into work today? 5 years ago, I was in that exact same place, except it was more than just a horrible feeling. I woke up on a Monday morning and had a full-blown panic attack and just couldn't face going into work. I felt trapped and powerless, but worst of all, I felt like I had no options, no other choice but to pull myself together and go into work that day, which I eventually did. And in the days following, I decided that I don't ever want to feel that way again. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the 5 steps that I took to get myself out of that place to a place where I now have more financial freedom and choice, so that just over 4 years later, when it happened again, I had the power and the freedom to walk away, which I did just over 12 months ago. My name's Pav, and I'm a chartered accountant who spent 12 years working in finance in London before leaving that career and taking a 30% pay cut to do a job I enjoy instead. And in this video, I'm going to talk to you the 5 steps that I took to get myself there so you can do it too. The first thing I did was to get super clear on what I want and what I don't want. And I think when emotions are high, we can get caught up in our feelings and think we want something, but what we actually want can be quite different. So some of the questions I asked myself to help me figure out what I do want were: what do I enjoy about what I do? What don't I enjoy? What would my ideal day look like if I could spend it however I wanted? What am I good at? What are my strengths? What skills have I honed and mastered in my career so far? And how else can I apply those skills? You see, when I started to think about this, the first thought that came to my mind was that I just want to quit my job and never have to work again. But as I started to think about the answers to those questions, I realized that it wasn't that I don't want to work. It was that I wanted to actually take my strengths and my skills and be able to apply them in a different way and have the freedom and the choice to do that. I also wanted a different working culture. And having worked at 4 corporate firms since leaving university, I knew that was going to be difficult, especially in finance at FTSE listed and private equity owned businesses. But I couldn't just leave my career because I needed a salary and a certain level of income at the time. I also wasn't prepared to leave without a backup plan. So I came to the realization that if I wanted to get out of the position I was in and give myself more freedom and choice, I would need to replace my income. So the next step was to figure out, well, how do I do this? I started to look at side hustles and other investments that help you generate an income alongside your day job, things like starting an Amazon store. I thought maybe I could have my own accountancy practice and have a few clients on the side. Maybe I could be an online tutor. However, I think whatever you choose, it's important to make sure that it's aligned with your natural skills, strengths, experience, and abilities. And that's where the questions that I asked myself in step 1 became really helpful. And when I reviewed those answers, none of those options seemed like the right fit. Another thing to figure out is, how much time do you have? And because I was still working, I knew I needed something that I could fit around my day job. And I just had to be really honest with myself about how many hours per week was I going to be able to dedicate to this new venture. And so eventually I landed on investing in property. And the way I knew this was right for me was because it suited my natural skill set, which was analyzing numbers, stress testing those numbers and running different scenarios, and then making decisions based on the outcomes of those scenarios. I also knew that I could outsource a lot of the groundwork, like finding properties and managing construction work, and so I knew I'd be able to fit it in around my day job as well. Now, figuring out what you want is great, but it means nothing if you don't actually start taking steps towards achieving your goal. So once I'd figured out what I wanted and how I was going to get there, the next thing I did was make sure that how I was spending my time was also aligned with what I wanted. And that meant, instead of wasting my free time, I completely threw myself into learning everything I could about investing in property. Instead of watching Netflix in the evenings, I started watching YouTube videos to learn about the different investment strategies that were out there. Instead of doom scrolling on social media, I started to follow Instagram pages of people that were already active in that space and join Facebook groups where I could connect with other people and like-minded individuals who had the same goals and aspirations to me. I started to read books written by successful investors and listen to podcasts when I was out for walks so I could learn about the different investing strategies and figure out which was right for me and how I could take my first step. And that all took quite a long time, and it was about 12 months before I actually took my first step and bought a property. And at the time it felt really slow and it was frustrating at times, but it was also deliberate because I didn't want to rush into anything and make any big mistakes early on. Now, they say that how you spend your time and your intentions are what determine the outcomes in your life, but I think the same can also be said for your money. So the fourth thing I did was to make sure that how I was spending my money was aligned with what I wanted. And I already saved and invested quite a high percentage of my take-home pay every month, but I knew that if I wanted a different outcome to the one I had in front of me, which was feeling trapped and like I had no choice, I had to become more intentional with how I was spending my leftover income. I'd actually been tracking my spending for many years. So when I looked at my spending tracker, I could very easily see where most of my leftover income was going. And it was on things like buying designer clothes, eating out in fancy restaurants and going for drinks at nice hotel bars, and on luxury holidays. Now, going on holiday was something that I really enjoyed and still do enjoy. I love the fact that I can have new experiences and share them with my friends and family. And in fact, some of my favorite memories throughout my life are when I've been abroad and surrounded by people that are really close to me. So I knew I didn't want to give those up, but I did decide to scale back on the number of trips that I was doing every year. But things like buying designer clothes and eating out in fancy restaurants were things that I gave up quite easily. And in fact, I've never actually quite gone back to in the same way. Instead, I saved more because I knew I would need that money to buy more properties one day very soon. And I wanted to do everything I could to achieve my goal as quickly as possible. I also started paying for an online fitness coach and started working out 4 days a week, which I've done every week since then. And I also paid for a couple of online courses to increase my education, and eventually paid for mentorship from two very successful entrepreneurs who ended up becoming great friends in the process. And whilst I don't invest in property education anymore, every year I still do allocate about 5 to 10% of my income to working on my self-development. Now, when it comes to deciding what you should cut out and what you should spend more on, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think the key is just to be very intentional and clear on what you are spending your money on, and making sure that it's what you want to be spending your money on rather than just being on autopilot. And if you need some help trying to figure this out, there's a simple framework that I use where I think that most spending can be categorized into 3 buckets, which is buying back your time, buying experiences, and buying physical items. And if you have a think about which of those 3 is most important to you, you can use that to help guide you on what you do want to be spending more on and what you don't. And finally, the 5th step I took was to shift my mindset from feeling like a victim and like I was powerless to taking responsibility for my future and focusing on what I could control. I knew that getting out of my career in finance wasn't going to happen overnight. It was going to be a long game, and it wasn't going to be plain sailing either. There were going to be things that happened that were out of my control, like economic changes and changes to the market. Some projects might take longer, things might cost more. I may even lose some money along the way. But I knew I needed to be patient and I needed to persevere. And that meant I needed to stop wasting energy on things that weren't in my control and double down on what was. I couldn't control if there was going to be a shift in the housing market, or if there were economic changes, or if a project took longer or cost more. But what I could control was how I was spending my time, how I was spending my money, and what actions I was taking every single week to move me closer to my goals. And the more I focused on what I could control, the more empowered and confident I felt. And I stopped feeling like I was waiting around for somebody to come and save me. And I realized what I was actually capable of doing myself. So those are the 5 steps that I took to get myself more financial freedom and choice. My name's Pav, and on this page, I'm going to be making more videos that can help you create a life where you have more freedom and choice. So if you enjoyed that, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.